Well, Erev Tov, everyone, and welcome to this first installment of this year's Jewish Music Heritage Learning Series. Many of us know the series in the context of worship services that feature Kolenu Adult Choir, many of whom are on this in this Zoom on the screen, as well as fabulous musicians and music from our rich Jewish musical heritage. Last year, due to the pandemic, we reimagined the initiative into a monthly learning series where we studied various prayers from our Shabbat evening liturgy, listening to and evaluating various musical settings of the prayers, as well as hearing from a guest composer and or scholar on a particular setting. Now this year, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Am Shalom, and we are still in a pandemic, though things are getting better and we are hopeful, we thought it might be super interesting and fun to take a look and listen back at the history of Chicagoland Jewish music. So this fall, we gather for a 2-session overview entitled A Brief History of Chicagoland Jewish Music with guest scholar Dr. Judah Cohen, whom we'll hear more about and from in just a moment. And beginning monthly in January of 2022, we'll dive a little deeper into a few of the Gedolim, or the greats, that have helped to shape and grow the Jewish music scene here in Chicagoland. And we will wrap things up with a special session on Thursday, May 19th with Ken Smith and friends, featuring highlights from the 5 decades of music at Am Shalom. Please note that we will be reaching out to many of you for help on this last one. More of that at a later date. And without further ado, I turn things over to Cantor Staple to welcome our special guest. Cantor?
And now it's my honor to introduce you to Dr. Judah Cohen. At Indiana University, Dr. Cohen is the director of the Robert A. and Sandra S. Bourne's Jewish Studies program in the College of Arts and Sciences, the Lou and Sybil Mervis Professor of Jewish Culture at the IU Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology, and Professor of Music and Musicology at the Jacobs School of Music. Pretty impressive. His training as a musicologist and an anthropologist and his professional activity within Jewish studies has allowed him to explore many aspects of Jewish culture and history. In his doctoral work, he explored the meaning of becoming a Reformed Jewish cantor at the turn of the 21st century based on 3 years of ethnographic study with cantorial students. Subsequent projects have led him to investigate the history of Jewish music scholarship in the United States, musical theater works that address Holocaust memory, contemporary forms of Jewish musical expression, and musical representations of such cultural figures as Anne Frank and Shylock. Throughout his research, Dr. Cohen has focused on the idea of Jewish cultural expression as a dynamic and ever-changing process, created and recreated over time by artists, religious leaders, philosophers, and activists. He has aimed to understand this idea largely through the prism of sound and its relationship to ideas of Jewish identity. On a personal note, I want to share that Dr. Cohen was my mentor and advisor while at Indiana University studying the Jewish sacred music curriculum. Dr. Cohen developed this curriculum in consultation with the Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music at Hebrew Union College and the Jewish Theological Seminary's H.L. Miller Cantorial School. The curriculum brings together 2 of Indiana University's greatest strengths by combining a curriculum of music theory, musicianship, music history, and vocal training with courses in Jewish history, texts, philosophy, and culture. Dr. Cohen developing this curriculum is a huge part of the reason that I decided to become a cantor. So now I hand it over to you, Dr. Cohen. I'm so excited for all of you to learn from our brilliant scholar this evening.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Cantor Staple. And it's really an honor to be able to call you Cantor Staple as well. It was, of course, a fantastic time to be able to work with you at Indiana University. And I am just thrilled to see you today in this extraordinary position and doing all of your amazing work. I also want to start by not just thanking Cantor Staple, but also thanking Cantor Andrea Markowitz and Cantor David for the introduction, and Cantor David Berger as well, whose voice you will be hearing, in fact, twice over during tonight's presentation. I also want to make sure to thank Ken Smith, who provided the piano accompaniment and who made some of the first recordings of some of these older pieces that we'll be talking about, I think in what may be more than 100 years, if far more than that. Now, I want to begin by sharing my screen because that's the way that we all do it these days. There you go. And to begin by talking about the sense of when we think about Jewish music in Chicago, when we think about synagogue music in Chicago, it goes back to the 19th century. One of the things that I learned when I was doing research on Jewish music in the United States is the importance that Chicago held, especially during the 19th century, but then, as you can imagine, also as a place where major figures of Jewish music continued to find congregations and also continued to be able to ply their trade, such that Chicago contributed to the well-being of American Jewish music between the mid-19th century and the present day. Today, what I want to do is I want to go through a really quick, unfortunately quick, history of some of the key moments in that really robust and really storied history of Jewish music in Chicago. And the place that I'd like to begin is to go back into the 1870s. During this time, in the 1870s, oh, one other thing I should add, by the way, and that is that if any of you have any questions, as Cantor Markowitz has identified there, I am not sure I'll be able to see the chat, but Cantor Markowitz, if you can stop me or provide any kind of let's see, or provide any kind of additional note just to say that it's there. There we are. Okay, I see it. Then please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I will try to accompany them or bring them into my discussion as well. I come from a family of 4 children. This is something which is really a part of the way that I think and speak these days. So let's begin by looking back into the 1870s. In the 1870s, there was a kind of a new form of music that we hear about, but we think of as very old today. See, what was pop music back then was in many ways the ability for people to come together, to sing together, to be able to be musically literate, and to be able to sing in harmony. We see pop music often today as something that is kind of light and usually talks about love or some form thereof. We do see that also in the 1860s and 70s. In this case, though, we see it more having to do with various types of semi-devotional poetry. And this is where we get into some very interesting directions when we look at hymns. Now, we'll look at Otto Loeb. Otto Loeb was born in 1837 in Germany and was trained in choral direction. In 1864, he came to the United States and settled in Chicago, where he lived until his death in 1908. Otto Loeb was one of a generation or several generations of people who saw hymns as a way to bring young people and to bring people in general into the synagogue. This goes all the way back, and we can go looking at, for example, the Württemberg hymnal in 1836. This is one of the earliest of the Jewish hymnals in existence. You can see that on the left, the words are in German, and you get all of these, the verses as well below, and people sang in 4-part harmony. You can also see throughout this on the right an American version of this by Wilhelm Fischer, which was published in Philadelphia in 1863. And as you look very closely at it, one of the things you'll see is that there were actually a lot of dynamics, a lot of articulation markings, and in fact, this kind of interesting idea that when we talk about hymns, we're not talking about a kind of a boxy, everybody sing all at once type of thing, but rather instead something that had a great deal of expression. And this contributed to the kind of pop phenomenon of the day, which was known as, in this case, the singing society, in which people would literally get together, a lot like you all are doing right now, and enjoy singing with each other. Not only would they enjoy singing with each other, but they would gather in gigantic gatherings across the country, sometimes of 30,000 people or so, to be able to sing choral music as one group. And you can see here a little bit more that this is not just Jews. This is all people of German heritage and background. And of course, we're talking as well about Jews at this point. They were also, most of them, of German heritage in the US. So this gives you some sense of what's going on. Let's move to an example that we see from Otto Loeb when he did his work, not just directing choirs in a synagogue, but directing many of these singing societies, what were known as men's choirs, women's choirs, and so on and so forth. Here's an example. This is Father of the World. And here I want you to look at the idea of this hymn, not just as something that's stuck in a book somewhere, but rather instead as a form of participatory music. This is the way that people felt that they could express themselves. And what's interesting here is that the idea of singing was itself a part of being kind of middle class in the United States. If you were a part of society, you had a musical knowledge, and you also had musical training. That's what it meant, in a sense, to contribute to a kind of a hip society at the time. And especially young people would get together and would sing these kinds of songs together. Note also, as we look at this from 1877, that the work has two lines to it. One of them is in German at the top, and the other one is in English at the bottom. 1877 was an important moment in German Jewish history, in American German Jewish history, to add as many qualifiers onto it as possible, because we had a generation of German speakers, but we also had their children now coming up who were, of course, speaking German in the home, but also speaking English out in the rest of the world and wanting to sing that way. So this hymnal that you see here reflects this changing moment and also reflects this appeal to young people. I want to also emphasize that when we're looking at this, these are young men and women. So you see SATB here. Let's hear what it sounds like. Again, thank you to Cantor Staple, Cantor Markowitz, to Ken, and to and also to Ken Smith, and also to Cantor Berg. And of course, you're welcome to sing the next several verses as well, which are, of course, right there. So here we are in the late 19th century, where we see hymn singing as a really central form of not just religious identification, but also identification as being Jewish outside of the synagogue as well. This kind of connection continues to be promoted as we see when we move forward to 1893. Now, in 1893, we had, of course, a very important moment in Chicago. The first, I believe, of the Chicago World's Fairs, known as the World Columbian Exposition, that is celebrating 400 years since Columbus. Now, at the World Columbian Exposition, there were all kinds of events. There were, of course, quite a number of countries, each presenting their pavilions throughout this. Of course, as you know, these World's Fairs were, for example, predecessors to what we see at Epcot Center, for example, at Disney World. But there were also different populations from Chicago that were presenting themselves in different ways there as well. One of those was, of course, the Jewish community. The Jewish population there came together and had a number of presentations. This was at the pavilion, I believe it's the Pavilion of Religions, which they had. And there was also a group that had its first meeting, its gathering at the World Columbian Exposition as well. This was the National Council of Jewish Women. The National Council of Jewish Women, which continues to exist today, was and remains one of the premier organizations for Jewish women in the United States. They decided that they wanted to create a souvenir that everyone would remember from this World's Fair. And they came up with this idea. They went to a couple of cantors, major cantors, in this case in New York and Baltimore. From Baltimore, Alois Kaiser; from New York, William Sparger. And they said, let's come up with a collection of music that people can use as a kind of a major, how would you say it, source for older melodies. We want to present melodies and we want to present Jewish music as something that is ancient, that will give people a sense of history when they sing it. And so Kaiser and Sparger got together and, along with the National Council of Jewish Women, created literally what was called a collection of the principal melodies of the synagogue from the earliest times to the present. Now, this collection had two parts to it. One of the parts was a part that, in fact, in the back of the book, had enormous amounts of art music. I think it was 10 pieces of contemporary synagogue art music from Louis Lewandowski all the way to American artists as well, including Alois Kaiser, as you could very well imagine. But the first 2/3 of the book, beyond this very intensive essay on the history of Jewish music, was in fact for regular people to enjoy Jewish music. Here's an example. They actually created a series of pieces of music that went along with the Jewish liturgical year. So whereas they had their first section, or their older section, their back section, I'm sorry, was much more elaborate. Their earlier section consisted of what they described as ancient melodies. And these were arranged for amateur performance, including instrumentals, solos, duets, and a few choral pieces as well. After this, as I mentioned, they had what were called modern melodies, and that included art music pieces by Lewandowski and Sulzer, and so on and so forth, and Kaiser. What I want to look at, though, is a section of the ancient melodies part, just to give you a sense of it all. And we'll look at the Shabbat section here. I'm going to begin with a piece, as you could see here. This is the first piece in the entire collection, called Vayachulu. And again, this is part of one of the early parts of the Friday night ceremony in the home. Let's listen to what it sounds like and imagine this as an ancient melody. Which it sounds like, wow, that's fantastic. So in fact, for those of you, you may have heard it before as well. And this is now where we were able to reprise it over here. Now, Kaiser and Sparger had this all choreographed out. So this would be at the home perhaps, or in the synagogue. They would go to services, and then after a family came back from services, they would start to sing together. Here's one example of this. In this case, a solo. Someone would go to the piano, and here's what you would hear upon return from the synagogue, or what, let's say, someone would sing.
Be thou blessed, be thou blessed at God's behest, holy Sabbath rest. Banished is all worldly care, Sabbath bears a bride so fair. Oh, rejoice in thee, welcome, welcome be.
And then you would go and have the meal. After the meal, we've got a few songs to sing as well, zimirot, as we would call them today. And here, in fact, you'll hear a pair of them going rather quickly.
This day we honor of all days, for on this day rested our Lord, rested our God.
And here's another one. Again, this one, karibon.
God, thou art the Lord of all the worlds, of all the worlds, and thou art the King of all kings. We sing praises to thee alone. We sing praises to thee alone.
And so thanks to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, this collection was brought out into the world and served as really the first representation that the National Council of Jewish Women had as well, to kind of present music to the rest of the country. Now let's move forward another 30 years or so, and then we get to another key moment in Chicago Jewish history and Jewish musical history that addresses Harry Coopersmith and the Chicago Board of Jewish Education. Now, the Chicago Board of Jewish Education was an important testing ground, really, for reintegrating music into Jewish religious and educational life. And essentially, it started off as the Jewish Education Committee and eventually became the Board of Jewish Education. One of the key figures involved in this, and it was established in 1924, one of the key figures involved in this was Harry Coopersmith. Now, Harry Coopersmith, let me see, what do I have here? Harry Coopersmith, one of the things I will add as well is that in 1984 it was established, and 3 years later the Jewish People's Institute was established as well as a place where music could serve as a key educational mode. Now, Harry Coopersmith was involved in this and really quite significant. He graduated from the Jewish Theological Seminary Teachers Institute in New York and became the founder of the BJE Music Department in 1926, where he stayed until 1930. Or so. And now, as part of this, he attempted to promote a Jewish musical aesthetic that could help Jews maintain a Jewish identity outside of traditional institutional frameworks. And Coopersmith organized numerous musical evenings at synagogues and elsewhere, while also advocating programs of Jewish music education that included, among other things, the Halevi Choral Society, which he co-founded with Hyman Resnick as one of the premier Jewish choirs in the Chicagoland area. Now, in 1930, he also, by the way, included a weekly Sunday radio show eventually. By 1930, he had actually left the BJE and had become the musical director of Anshe Emeth in Chicago. And eventually, after 1940, he moved to New York City and ended up serving as the director of music at the BJE there, and of course, producing a number of major musical works, be they hymnals or the songs we sing or more of the songs we sing. He was a key figure there. But he got his start and he got much of his experience in Chicago. Let me give you an example of one of the things that he did. Here is a songbook that he collected for Anshe Emeth called Songs of My People. In this case, I want you to look at one song. This is Lecha Dodi. And one of the things he attempted to do was to get communities and congregations to sing and to make a broad variety of music accessible. Here's what we see through this. To be able to get people to sing, he placed an emphasis on congregational song and on this idea of connecting with a soloist, but doing so in a very orderly way, so that it was almost as if the congregation was a choir itself. His work included not just work with the BJE, but also work with, in this case, Anshe Emeth's rabbi, Solomon Goldman, who actually created an entire book called Prayers and Readings that would accompany this songbook. The other thing that's interesting about this piece in particular is that you can see that it incorporates Hasidic music into the Kabbalat Shabbat service, thus trying to add a kind of a new spirit to the idea of what Kabbalat Shabbat was all about. Now, the fun part here is that you may actually hear me singing this one. And just to give you a sense of it all, I can sing it very quickly. This is one that I actually sang when I was a kid, although I grew up on the East Coast. Lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabla. Lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabla. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. Hishmianu el Hamiyuchad, Adonai Echad Echad, Ushemo Echad, L'Shem Ultiferet Ve'elit Yila, and then you go back to Lecha Dodi. You can hear from this a very different sound, one that sounds, if you will, almost Jewish-ish because it has this augmented second mode, da, 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 that has been kind of presented in many ways as a calling card for Jewish music. And you see this as a way to be able to engage people in this idea of Jewish identity, one that then expands outward and tries to promote the joy that became associated with Hasidic song. Well, let's move forward a little bit further now as well to into or around this time into the 1930s. Now we have this from 1937, but we can also see that when we go back to the Chicago World's Fair, we see yet another extraordinary moment of Jewish music in Chicago that becomes extremely well known. What we'll see here is the pageant is what it's called, Romance of a People. Now, Romance of a People came out around the time or was part of this series of pageants that were really popular in the early part of the 20th century. People telling long stories about, and musical stories, all about the history of a particular place or a particular people. And here we had the opportunity to see this in its most gigantic form. This was staged at the Chicago World's Fair called A Century of Progress. And at the World's Fair, they had a Jewish Day. This was July 3rd, 1933, when the Jewish population would come together and present themselves as contributors to Chicago's history. This piece was conceived as a spectacle along the core question, are Jews a race, a nation, or an ethnicity? And they presented themselves, remember this in 1933, as a people with all of these aspects, but at the same time facing uncertainty and doing so in the largest scale imaginable. Lots of people moved to the World's Fair, moved to Chicago or came to Chicago at the time. It was produced with Meyer Weisgall and Isaac Van Grove as composer and conductor. To give you a sense of the scale of this, here is a model of the set. It took place at Soldier Field, which could seat 100,000 people and had a cast of 6,000 people, half of whom were young people. The major national Jewish youth organizations held their conventions at exactly that time, so there would be enough people there. The whole thing was choreographed. There was a massive orchestra under the main proscenium. This gives you a sense of what it was like from the field looking at this romance of a people. And this gives you a sense of the scale. Here you have Isaac Van Grove, who is directing just a part of the chorus, about a third of the chorus. In total, there were 1,000 singers singing all at once in Soldier Field. And just in case you felt you weren't much of a singer, well, we also had dancers by the hundreds, also all costumed and presenting themselves. And this is what the crowd looked like on July 3rd, 1933. Here's what the program was like. By the way, 125,000 people in Soldier Field. Oh yeah, and there were so many people that wanted tickets that they had to do a second performance the next night. Here's what the Romance of a People program looked like. We started with a prologue called The Creation. We moved to the first episode, which was Mankind in the, this is really, how to say it, epic. Mankind in the Grip of Demons and the Coming of Abraham, clearly to address that and to introduce monotheism to the world. The second episode is Egyptian slavery and the deliverance, once again. Then there's an interlude, which is, I quote, a peaceful caravan of camels crossing a field in ancient Palestine, the promised land. Followed by a third episode, the glory of the temple. Here we have the temple period, which then leads to the fourth episode. Of course, we get to this at some point, which is the destruction of the temple and the beginning of the diaspora. And thus the fifth episode, wandering of the exiles, followed by an interlude, which is the emergence of the spirit of Hasidism. Again, Hasidism here becomes a kind of a key way to be able to address spiritual redemption. And then finally, after that, the sixth episode, which is the new liberation. That is to say, that of the United States and Palestine. Remember 1933, pre-state Palestine. We don't have music, unfortunately, from this time, but what we do have, just to give you a sense of it, is about 1.5 minutes worth of video, silent video, to give you a sense of what this was like. This would be considered to be video that was underscored a narrative. I can certainly give you this narrative. This comes from the Golden Calf section, just to give you a sense of it all. Here we go. Give it a moment, because obviously it needs to have the key thing there, but this gives you a sense as to how many see this gigantic Jewish pageant. There we go. This is what Soldier Field looked like, and there's the Chicago skyline. Here are the people that are all looking there. This is July. There is the golden calf that is being pulled. Again, we're talking about something that's about 30 feet tall there. And here we have some of the dancers associated with this particular episode, just to give you a sense of the giant scale. There we go. And of course, yeah, we have the special effects as well. There is the high priest, Aaron, who has just made the golden calf. There is the calf again smoking. And we have these there are the dancers yet again. This gives you a sense of the gigantic nature of it all, I believe. And there we go. It goes even further, not just smoking, but here we see all the special effects associated with this part now at night in full regalia. So this gives you just a taste of what it was like, of this massive pageant that used music that came from collections of Jewish music at the time, especially those of Avram Tzvi Edelson, considered to be the father of Jewish music research. And again, you see the gigantic scale that we're looking at there. Now, what else was going on at this time? Well, we also see cantors. And remember that we had choral music, which was seen as more of a people's music and a kind of a young people's music for quite a while. We had music that would educate congregants and bring congregants into this idea of Jewish ethnic identity. And we also have, of course, cantors, who were often associated with Orthodox synagogues, but who also came here to concertize. Many of them were Eastern European born or Central European born, and many of them actually were involved primarily primarily on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, and so on. Chicago was a place where cantorial music did thrive in some of these congregations, but it was also a place that was known where cantors came through and occasionally stayed. B. Krause, who's written an entire book on this, identifies several famous cantors who came through, including Josela Rosenblatt, Mordechai Hirschman, Pierre Pinchik, who came through many times, Zeidel Rovner, and so on. This style became associated with this idea of a kind of a heroic tenor style, and often was accompanied, with an all-male choir. It is still today addressed as a core of what we might consider traditional synagogue music, as both Cantor Staple and Cantor Markowitz might attest to, that this is what we see as traditional chazanut today, the voice of not just tradition, but also this voice of heritage. Now, the key figure that I came across in Chicago is Cantor Joshua Lind. Lind was born in Lemberg in Galicia in Central Europe, Central to Eastern Europe, and he grew up as, or at least got a lot of experience as a choir boy for a major cantor named Zeidel Rovner. In 1913, he came to the United States and spent a lot of time on the East Coast. However, in 1933, on the same day as Romance of a People, he performed at the Chicago World's Fair as well for Jewish Day. And later, he joined the Austrian Galician Schule on California Avenue. Let me give you an example of one of his compositions. He's best known for his high holiday compositions, and we can see this in this case with his piece El Melech Yoshev. This one, we don't unfortunately have a recording of Lind. We have very few archival recordings of him, but we have what we might consider to be a wonderful heritage recording as well, sung by Alberto Mizrahi, Abe Mizrahi, who is of course one of the great Chicago cantors as well. Let me play for you this piece, at least a section of it, El Melech Yoshev. Now, of course, we should move forward to, of course, if you had to think about one celebrity composer of Jewish music or a major composer of Jewish music for, major composer of Jewish music from Chicago, one of the key figures is Max Janowski, one of the first people that might come to mind during the mid-20th century. Now, here's Max Janowski, and he arrived in New York at first from Liverpool, actually, in 1937. And he essentially was there after 3 years on the piano faculty in Tokyo, Japan, after, of course, fleeing the Nazis. He applied for American citizenship that November, excuse me, and then he went to Chicago in March of 1938. Initially, what he was going to do was prepare the music for a Jubilee celebration for the United Synagogue, what we now call the conservative movement. And he remained there over the summer. Now, in late September of 1938, Harry Cooper-Smith actually ran an article in the Chicago Jewish Sentinel. He was railing against Christians singing in local synagogue choirs and essentially telling Jews that they were trying to copy the church in their music rather than striving after more original Jewish musical forms. The article, of course, was taken in all kinds of interesting ways. But suffice it to say that while one of the things they did was they actually took a poll of choirs in Chicago area synagogues. And they found that the singers themselves were largely Jewish. But the organists, well, half of those organists, including the organist at KAM, now KAM Isaiah Israel, were not. And perhaps shortly after that, when KAM hired Max Janowski as its organist and music director, they were making a statement. Now, Janowski worked closely with Harry Cooper-Smith before 1940 and eventually with Hyman Resnick as well, accompanying Jewish music events frequently. At KAM, he worked with a professional choir, had short weekly pre-service organ recitals, and attempted to create his own volunteer choir. But eventually, the way his career finally came into the spotlight was once there was a program that was initiated by Rabbi Jacob Weinstein, who began to emphasize congregational engagement after 1942. At that point, this attempt to create a layman's congregation opened up a newly energized choir committee at KAM that then orchestrated its kind of three-pronged plan to encourage congregants to sing or to be involved in music. First, Janowski would have the task of creating a specific Jewish musical idiom, that's literally what they wanted, that would sound different from other church styles, in a sense composing original themes based on the authentic cantillations of the synagogue in their words. Then the committee would educate congregants to recognize and prefer this idiom, And last and most significantly, they encouraged young people to engage with this musical style by trying to create their own volunteer choir and organ instruction program. In doing this, Janowski was able to combine professional singers with members of the congregation and eventually fashion this amazing ensemble that would allow him to then really move forward and become one of the great composers of this time. He created a series of choruses, and from there also started to address and make stage major works in Western classical tradition that reflected what he saw as a particular Jewish point of view, including Mendelssohn's oratorio Elijah and Handel's Judas Maccabeus, again performed with the KAM choir in this kind of time. Now, he also became famous as a composer after creating this service called Avodat HaKodesh for KAM's 100th anniversary. And of course, his piece Avinu Malkeinu, which was the co-winner of a local Jewish music competition sponsored by the College of Jewish Studies, which eventually becomes the Spertus Institute. That piece, interestingly, did not premiere at a service, but instead at a Malava Malka event at the college. This made him one of the great figures of Judaism and emphasized his role in promoting a progressive vision of the Jewish future. And here's an image of Avinu Malkeinu. And last, to end here, I'll play an example, in this case, Psalm 121, Esa Enai from 1962, with Beatrice Horowitz as the soloist and Max Janowski on piano. And again, a wonderful moment. So now We are in the post-war period. What lays in store for Chicago and Jewish music? Well, that will be continued at our next in our next episode. Thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure. I know that it's 8:55 right now, so I am happy to turn this back over to Cantor Markowitz and to Cantor Staple to do any Q&A that you wish, and also to be able to take us home.
Wow, thank you so much. So great, so interesting. And I know we at least have one question, which you somewhat addressed in the chat.
Yeah.
I'll share one small thing, which I've shared with some of you before. I found it interesting when I came here and heard a lot of the repertoire that I had done so much work on the East Coast that I was surprised at how much Lewandowski was not sung in the Midwest. Well, we know why, because Janowski is here in the Midwest, and Janowski's work then sort of went on from where Lewandowski left off, and created sort of this, sort of the next wave of what was happening in Jewish music in synagogues and beyond.
Yeah, I can add just a little bit as well, if it's okay, to this also, and that is that we see that there were essentially two centers in the 19th century and into the 20th century. There was New York on one side, and there was Chicago and Cincinnati on the other side. These two actually they did kind of have a little bit of a rivalry. They were, for example, the first two regions of B'nai B'rith. And in fact, those two regions did compete with each other because, after all, Isaac Mayer Wise was the person who founded the kind of Midwestern region that we see now. Isaac Mayer Wise was also one of the major figures to introduce synagogue music, especially Solomon Zulzer's music, to the United States in the 1840s. What's interesting is that Lewandowski actually does not appear in the US until the late 1880s, and then primarily on the East Coast. So what you see then is a kind of a normative form of Orthodox Judaism that you get on the East Coast, with much other variation, of course. And you see, in a sense, also the development of much more hymn singing in the Midwest, and much more kind of a character of more choral singing in the Midwest as well. And interestingly, this serves as a nice basis for imagining what happens later when we see a young woman who becomes one of the key figures for congregational singing later on in the 1970s through Debbie Friedman. She came up also in the Midwest, and the Midwest in many ways was a core part of the music that she created. So we, as a little bit of a preview anyway.
So mark your calendars. Part 2, as we continue on, will be November 11th, same time, same place, same Zoom link. And a couple other upcoming things. Before I even start, if anyone has any other questions that they want to pose, you can raise your hand, you can pop them in the chat, or actually just unmute yourself and ask away.
And I got one more question directly from Steve. Is it okay, Steve, if I were to read out your question? Okay, fantastic. So Steve Doblin, is that the right way to pronounce it?
Doblin, yeah.
Okay, Doblin asked, in the US in the 1930s and 40s, was there a formal ordination process for cantors, or some sort of apprenticeship approach, or something else? So let me be direct with you. In the 1930s and 40s, there were at least 6 cantorial schools that were that tried to come up and tried to exist. I've actually written an article about these cantorial schools. We like to think about this idea of an apprenticeship as the kind of what was traditional. But in fact, the closer you look at it, the more you see that schools and institutions really served as the center, or a key center of transmission of this tradition in the US and elsewhere. So what begins to happen is that in the 1930s, these kind of short-lived cantorial schools start to train small numbers of cantors, and eventually the idea that the cantor was the figure who held Jewish tradition led to the establishment of the School of Sacred Music in 1948, of what becomes the Cantors Institute in 1952, and the Bell School of Music, or at least the cantorial program at Yeshiva University in 1954, as a kind of a mode of homage to the cantorial traditions that were lost in Europe during the Nazi period. So that gives you one sense of it all. And this, of course, alongside many others who were doing their best to learn with other cantors as well. Part of the reason these cantorial schools existed or came to exist is that people said, we need to create standards. And so those standards were there. They also existed in Europe, to make that clear. So not always successfully, but that gives you some kind of a sense of where it is. I know that I took an extra minute or so on that one.
No, all good. Thank you.
Sure.
Raybox, did you have a question? I saw that you unmuted yourself, and I'll unmute you again.
Yes, I lucky enough to come to when I came from Germany in 1938. We joined KM Temple. They had been in existence since 1848, and I was bar mitzvah in 1947, and only the sixth reform bar mitzvah at KM in that whole year of 1947. And I sang with Max Janowski during the time that I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then we formed Beth Am, and then there was Bernie Nam, and there was ultimately the Moog synthesizer man, Hans Werman, who was our choral director and an organist, etc. So that's my story that relates in parallel to what you talked about tonight. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. That's an incredible story, and one where, I can certainly talk about history, but you can talk about the history as you've experienced it. And that to me is extremely valuable. So thank you so much. And I hope that you have an opportunity to talk more about what your experience was like, both in Janowski's choir and also in Werman's, the Werman experience as well.
Awesome. Anyone else want to have a question or comment that they'd like to share? I know as we heard the last, the Beatrice Horwitz piece, singing SI, and I can imagine, and with us on screen, although they signed off like a little while ago, was Jean Diamond, our congregation's first cantorial soloist. And I could not help thinking about her voice singing that beautiful prayer, and I imagine that many people on the screen have probably heard her actually sing that SI.
On one other note, the sheet music that Dr. Cohen showed us of the Avinu Malkeinu Janowski, like the original copy, that's the copy she has in her binder when she sings it on Yom Kippur.
Wow. Wow, that's extraordinary.
From behind the scenes.
Yeah, now you all know.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being with us. I mark your calendars, November 11th for part 2. And just a few things to be aware of that are happening at Am Shalom. We have a pajama drive starting this Sunday, October 24th, for our friends at Cradles to Crayons. If you feel inclined, please bring new children's pajamas to the temple. There'll be a drop-off box in the front and also more information on the website. Either Tuesday morning or Wednesday evening of next week, we'll join with 36 area congregations for a program entitled Hinei Matov, Israeli and American Jews' Views of Each Other. A live from Israel webinar featuring Rabbi Naama Kalman, Dean of HUC-JIR in Jerusalem, and Dr. Alan Ezrahi, professor at University of Haifa. You do have to register for this, and the link is on our website to register. We launched this week, just yesterday, this fall series of Scholar in Our Shelter with Mike Hollander, and we'll be meeting again next Wednesday at noon. And of course, tomorrow night and Saturday morning, Shabbat services. Join us in the multiple ways that you can, in person or via live stream or Facebook. Cantor Staple.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And again, Dr. Cohen, thank you so much. We're really looking forward to the next session.
And everyone, feel free to unmute yourself, say goodbye.
Of course. A pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Thanks, Judah. You're great.
you. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you. You brought back such wonderful memories for me as a child growing up. And also the fact that I was honored as a child to sing with Max and with B. Horwitz too. Little did we know then that he would become such a driving force in making Chicago the center of great Jewish music and a center for some wonderful, wonderful cantors then, and of course now. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Oh, certainly.
I first met Jeannie Diamond when we were in Sunday school at South Shore Temple, and Helmut Spitzer was a driving force in her music career. I was asked to just move my lips.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Edith.
Looking forward to November 11th. Good night, all. Shabbat
Good
Shalom.
night.
Early.
Night.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Night. Thanks again.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for being with us.
Sure thing.
Thank you from Ohio.
We got the Midwest covered today. Indiana, Ohio,
Yeah,
Illinois.
But we have Ken Smith right now.
Well, you
More
wonder
from
what's
Ken
special
Smith.
about the Midwest and Jewish music. Well, here it is. You know, clearly